many nations have a code word, a word that actually unlocks the secrets of that society. Now, in the case of the United States, that word is liberty. And a lot of good and bad things are done in the name of liberty. In France, the word is égalité, equality, and we know the 35-hour week, the 70% tax rate, all these are products of their obsession with equality. The word for India, and I would submit that possibly beyond, since this is an Asia forum, beyond India, that word is actually Dharma. And one of the reasons why individual liberty keeps hitting the wall in many of our societies is because we have not actually sold liberty in the language of the people. Now, Dharma means many things. It's a very frustrating word. It can mean duty, it can mean virtue, it can mean law, it can mean religion. But the average person, the average Indian certainly understands that word to mean doing the right thing. The other feature about Dharma is that it does not seek moral perfection the way 10 Commandments, for example, do. And so it's especially useful for policymakers and rulers because it does not seek moral perfection. So it's, in a sense, when people behave according to Dharma, there is harmony in society and in the cosmos. And when we think about markets, very often the norms that are embodied in Dharma are the norms that create trust in markets. They lead to self-restraint. Because as you all know, that trillions of dollars worth of transactions take place around the world, and they take place on the click of a computer. Everybody is not making a legal document and thinking of the police to enforce that document. So another way to think about it is that when people behave, that people are able to trust each other because they share these norms. So the difficulty we've had in India particularly is that we have a wonderful constitution, a very liberal constitution, very much like the American Constitution. But the people of the country thought that constitution sort of fell from heaven one day. They did not think it was theirs. And nobody sold them this constitution. The last person who had sold those ideas, those liberal ideas in the constitution, was actually Mahatma Gandhi. Before independence and during the freedom struggle, he fought for freedom from the British Raj by using the word Dharma. He fought against untouchability, the notion of equality, by using Dharma, and his ideas resonated. But he died soon after independence, and Nehru was our first prime minister. And Nehru's ideas, Nehru was not steeped into the country the way Gandhi was, and he tried to sell those ideas of liberty and equality and justice through the medium of the individual rights, through the Western mindset. And he was a good man, But he was a good man with bad economic ideas, but he was a good man. The country is united today partly because of him. So there's a lot of, but he was not able to sell the ideas and ideas of the Constitution. Now the Constitution makers themselves were very much imbued with the notion that nation building was a moral project. And so they had a very clear idea, and they put the wheel of Dharma, that's what we call the Ashok Chakra, in the flag of the country to remind us. And today, when we see when corruption scandals break out with great frequency in our country, the headlines in the local newspapers say that Dharma has been wounded. Liberty has existed in our society for thousands of years. And certainly in India, the temper of the country is a temper which is a temper based on the fact that we've always had a weak state and a strong society. Unlike China, which always had a strong state and a weak society. Well, the fact is you need both. You need a strong state to get things done, and you need a strong society to make that state accountable. India's history was a history of kingdoms, competing kingdoms for thousands of years, unlike China's history, which was a history of empires. And even the four empires we had in India, the Maurya, the Gupta, the British, the Mughal and the British, were weaker than the average Chinese empire. In China, the emperor gave the law and then he interpreted the law. In India, the Dharma preceded the king, and the job of the king was to uphold Dharma for the sake of the people. And the interpreter of Dharma was not the king, but the Brahmin. So very early on, in 6th century BC, in the kingdom of Magadha, we had created a liberal division of powers which weakened the state. So therefore in India, the oppression never came from the state, unlike China. Oppression came from society, meaning the Brahmins, and the answer to that oppression was a Buddha or a spiritual entrepreneur who came around every few years and took peoples away from that oppression. In fact, 1947, India became a democracy and China became a totalitarian state. And this was consistent with the temper of the two countries. And today, China is rising from above with amazing technocratic elite which has built incredible infrastructure. And India is rising from below, almost despite the state. Certainly in the case of India, it is happening. India is rising on the back of free markets. And this is not surprising. Unlike many countries, the merchant was a respected figure in society. He was high caste, twice born, he's called twice born. And merchants and bazaars have been with us forever, right from the Neolithic age. There was also purpose to economic activity, and the ancients were acutely aware of the fact that material well-being was one of the goals of life. And they basically believed that markets, profit, money, material well-being, what is called artha, leads to the good life. But those markets must be under Dharma. That is, there is a right and a wrong way to make money. And I suppose today the CEOs of the 25 Indian globally competitive companies would all subscribe to the notion that their project is also to raise the poor in society. The other aspect which I quoted the other day was that there are many references in the classical text to the fact that the king, a wise king, must levy moderate taxes. And in fact, in the Arthashastra, it's defined. It's called Shatbhagan. And Shatbhagan means 1/6 or 15%. So what is the fair tax rate according to Dharma is 15%. And so here was a society that really was a society that believed in economic liberty, but the language of liberty was not the language of individualism. It was a language of and Dharma. So therefore, actually, the 40 years that we had in India from 1950 to 1990 was an aberration, was not in keeping with the temper when we had a command economy, what we call the license permit Raj. And this was and it's hard to blame Nehru because the whole world, frankly, believed in the 50s in socialism. But certainly I would blame his daughter, Indira Gandhi, because by then we knew better. We knew better. Still, the fact is that today capitalism is trying to find a comfortable home in India. And the amazing thing is that you realize that here's a country which gives enormous political liberty to its people, enormous religious liberty, liberty of thought, expression. We have 180 news channels, 24/7 in India, in all the languages, of course. And yet, with all this liberty, why doesn't it give economic liberty in the same way? And why do Indian policymakers, reformers, have to reform by stealth, in secret? And why is it that people still believe that economic reforms, capitalism, are all about making the rich richer and the poor poorer? Certainly attitudes have changed from 1990 for the last 2 decades, but nevertheless, it's a puzzle. And I think there are 2 reasons for this. One is the reformers themselves, especially our Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, never sold the reforms. He should have learned from Margaret Thatcher, who used to say that she used to spend 20% of the time reforming and 80% of the time selling the reforms. And our Prime Minister, who's a big reformer, who's one of the great economists, he hasn't even converted his own political party to markets. Certainly not Sonia Gandhi. And therefore, this is one of the reasons why the countries, which was 2.5 years ago, the envy of the world, growing at 8.5%, 9%, is down to 4.5%. And so, if I were in their place, I would be on television every night and tell people that the reforms help everybody. Markets help everybody, not just business. That there's a difference between being pro-business and pro-market. Pro-market means you believe in competition. Competition improves the quality of products, lowers their costs, and helps everybody, and leads to a rules-based capitalism. Whereas pro-business is basically to be uh, leads to crony capitalism. It leads to the state keeping discretion on licenses, and this of course leads to crony capitalism. In India, we still need what I would call a strong liberal state. And a strong liberal state has three pillars. One, it has a executive that can take quick, determined, decisive action when required. That action is bound, second pillar, by the rule of law. And third, it's accountable to the people. Now that's the classical liberal state. And we have to remind ourselves constantly, because these problems occur all over the world. You have weak executives. US has one big problem, and that's the deficit. And the state has not been able to solve that. Europeans have a problem of the welfare costs, healthcare, welfare costs. They have not been able to solve that problem. So there are weak states everywhere, and it's not easy to get such a liberal, strong liberal state, because these three pillars don't reinforce each other. They sometimes undercut each other. Too much concern for accountability leads to a weak executive. And that's what I found. We have found what has happened here with the Anna Hazare movement. And but it's a struggle that we must all wage. And let me conclude then by saying that the economic rise of India has been the defining event of my life. At a time when the West has lost confidence in its institutions, especially there is angst over the future of free market capitalism after the global financial crisis. A large nation is rising in the East based on those very principles. Now we have to keep fighting for those principles, but those are the very principles that have. So, in other words, I think not only India, but the rise of Asia is good for the world in this respect. Thank you.